Hello, this is Bryant Myers, author of PEMF, The Fifth Element of Health, and welcome to Whiteboard Wednesdays, where I'm going to answer your questions that you have about PEMF therapy and help to clear the confusion using real science and real physics. Today's question is the most common one that I get, is what is the best frequency to use for a PEMF therapy device? And there is so much confusion around this idea of frequency that I think this is a very important video. So first of all, we need to understand what frequency is. Now, in basic middle school science, we're taught that frequency is the number of cycles per second. So here, let's say this signal here was 1 second. So you can say, well, there's about 3 cycles per second, and the frequency is 3 hertz. Now, there are some PEMF therapy companies that use a simple sine wave for their signal, and in those situations, you can use just simple frequency to list what is the frequency of the device. But a lot of the really good PEMF devices like the iMRS, Beamer, QRS, Metathera use very complex signals. So let me kind of draw you a little picture here. So let's say we have a square wave pulse. And then we have 3 pulses separated by a pause, and then 3 more pulses. And then we can have like 3 bundles of these separated by a longer pause, which is something that like the iMRS and QRS and Beamer does. So the question is, what is the frequency of this signal? Well, it doesn't make any sense to talk about a frequency because this is a complex signal. So to really understand complex signals, we need to use a branch of engineering called signal processing. Signal processing is the investigation and interpretation of signals. So signals can be anything from radio waves to television to your cell phone to music. So there's lots of applications for signal processing, but I want to focus on signal processing with regards to PEMF therapy. And with signal processing, there's 2 tools that we need to understand a complex signal. The first tool is an oscilloscope. And what an oscilloscope will show you is the signal as a function of time. So if it was a square wave, this would be time here, and this would be plotted, say, microtesla or voltage, or the intensity. And so you can kind of see the geometric form of the signal on an oscilloscope. Now, I've seen some review videos where people are trying to use an oscilloscope to say that, oh, the iMRS or some company doesn't use the right frequency in their listings. Well, they don't understand signal processing. You don't use the oscilloscope to understand the frequency. What you use is a spectrum analyzer. And I'm going to go over that in a minute. But a spectrum analyzer will show you the frequency domain of a signal. So to properly understand a signal, we need 2 eyes. We need the eye of the oscilloscope to show us what it looks like in the domain of time, and we need a spectrum analyzer to see what the signal looks like in the domain of frequency. Okay, so a little show and tell here. So I have right now a Roden-Schwarz oscilloscope, and I'm going to be getting a spectrum analyzer. I don't have one yet, but that's something I want to be purchasing soon. And so to look at a PEMF signal, we need a good oscilloscope, and this is one of the best companies, and a good spectrum analyzer. Otherwise, we're just flying blind. We're not seeing with any eyes. Companies that just list or talk about only intensity and only frequency, they're really not talking about the right parameters. What you want to know is the oscilloscope, what the waveform looks like, how rapidly does it rise and fall, what is the pulse train in a function of time. Like when you look at like a zoom out, you can see the whole pulse train on an oscilloscope if you've got a storage device. And on a spectrum analyzer, you can see all the frequencies that are in the signal, kind of like a multivitamin. You want a signal with a broad spectrum of frequencies. So now I want to go through a couple examples to really drive this point home. And I want to first start with the Irs Sawtooth. So we can look at the Irs Sawtooth with 2 eyes. And I did a video where I showed the sawtooth on the screen and kind of explained it. But I just want to go over the signal processing understanding of a good signal. Because good signals are complex in PEMF therapy devices, and they're not easy to you can't describe them with just a simple frequency. You have to use signal processing and look at the oscilloscope and a spectrum analyzer. So here we have right here what the iMRS signal would look like on an oscilloscope. So again, an oscilloscope is going to measure the wave as a function of time in the time domain. And you're going to see the little peaks here can be either microtesla, like I said, or say voltage, or you could convert it to Gauss. And so you can see here that you can see the rapid rise and fall nature of the signal. And if we carried this out, and I don't have enough whiteboard to show it here, but if you have like a digital storage oscilloscope, you can store the whole signal and kind of zoom out from a bird's eye view, and you'll see that there's bundles within bundles within bundles of pulses on this iMRS. In fact, 5 layers of complexity with pauses in between the bundles. And that's just, the reason you want that in a PMF signal, and Metathera does it, iMRS does it, QRS does it, Beamer does it, but a lot of the cheaper companies don't. They just give you a repetitive waveform, which sometimes you can just describe with frequency. But complex waveforms you can't. So we're seeing this signal here in the time domain on an oscilloscope. And complex systems, or complex signals like in the iMRS, Beamer, and QRS, will have many layers of complexity, which I won't go into here. But the reason that they do that is to prevent habituation or acclimation, and the rest, it's called pulse-pause modulation. They put pauses in between the bundles of pulses so that your cells don't get fatigued. Just like when you work out with weights, you don't want to just go to the gym and do 1,000 curls. You want to go and rest in between sets, and then you want to rest even maybe a little bit longer in between different exercises. Same principle here. PMF therapy is cellular exercise, as good research has shown, and the way that it moves charges and fluids around the cells looks just like exercise. So a spectrum analyzer is what we need to understand the PMF signal in the frequency domain. So if you're going to list the frequencies that you use, you need to be understanding that from the frequency domain of a spectrum analyzer. So let's kind of go through the confusion. So like one of the comparison videos showed the iMRS pulse was about 64 hertz based on their oscilloscope reading of frequency. Well, that's not incorrect. That's incorrect. Why? Because you don't measure frequency from an oscilloscope. You measure frequency from a spectrum analyzer. This shows you all the relative amplitudes of all the frequencies that are in the signal. So the iMRS, Beamer, and QRS, again, they're the 3 best in my opinion, and Metathera also, they have very complex signals, so you get a broad spectrum of frequencies from the low frequency all the way up to the even kilohertz. And why do you need kilohertz? Well, kilohertz gives you this rapid rise and fall in both sawtooth or a square wave. You can't get this sharp rise and fall without the higher frequencies. In fact, in signal processing, they define frequency as how quickly a signal changes instead of cycles per second. So can you see here that this is a very complex answer to what is the frequency of an iMRS sawtooth? The answer is it's got a lot of frequencies. It's got a broad frequency spectrum, but now let's say on the evening program on the iMRS, it's primarily a 3 hertz signal. Why? Because the greatest amplitude of all these frequencies is around the 3 hertz range, or it's around the low frequency range. They kind of raise this up. QRS does the same thing. So in the morning, you're going to get this part of the spectrum raised up, so this whole thing goes up a little higher, depending on the time of day. So that's where the organ clock comes from. It's a very complex answer, and when we list 0.5, 3, 5.5, and 15 hertz in the iMRS manual, just understand that that's just the peak frequencies for the time of day, but in every setting you're getting a broad band of frequencies. And in conclusion, I want to explain why that's important. In fact, the cheaper PMF devices don't do this very well. There was an independent European study that looked at all the PMF devices of Europe, and they concluded that the iMRS and Beamer were the top 2 by far. And a lot of the other ones they just didn't even look at closely because of engineering and technical difficulties. They just gave really limited spectrums. There was hardly any frequencies in there, or their waveforms were ill-formed, like their square wave wasn't really a square wave, like I've seen on the OMI and some of the cheaper systems. So when they looked at all these devices, they found the iMRS and the Beamer as the 2 best because of 2 things. Of the rapid rise and fall nature and the complexity of the signal, so there's no cellular fatigue. And number 2, the spectrum analysis showed a broad spectrum of biologically active frequencies, because the human body primarily resonates to, as shown by Siskin and Walker, Addy and Bowen, and many others. I've put a chart many places online to show that the 0 to 50 hertz, or you could say 0 to 200 hertz window, is where most of the cells and tissues are resonating to. So we want to make sure that our signal has a broad spectrum within that biologically active range. And now, spectrum analyzers that go down into the low frequency are very expensive. So you're not going to be seeing many reviews done by PEMF companies showing the low frequencies. This is something I am going to do and I'm going to invest in so I can show you all the different PEMF devices, and I promise it's going to shock you at how few PEMF devices really do it right, where they get a good rapid rise and fall signal to create maximum ion transport and a broad band of frequencies. Just like a good multivitamin, you get everything all at once, versus doing this frequency for this frequency for that, this frequency for that. Some of these companies that list all these, they say, oh, we can go 1 to 10,000 hertz. That's not a good thing. It's because their signal is so simplistic, you have to dial in what frequency you want. But then it's like, well, what frequency do I use? The beauty of the iMRS, Beamer, and QRS is it's like it's all in there. You don't have to do this frequency for this frequency for that. And the only reason that they have frequency settings is because they shift up the bands depending on the time of day. So at night, they're going to shift, like in the Beamer, it shifts up 10 hertz is the primary amplitude. On the iMRS, at night we have 0.5 and 3 hertz for the evening and night, which is a little bit better for sleep. One last thing. Over here, I just kind of wanted to show you a square wave. So this is a good illustration here because it's showing you when you have, say, a square wave, which is down here, you can see that a square wave, what's called Fourier, we're not going to get into Fourier mathematics in this video, but Fourier series and Fourier transforms, you can express any function, any continuous function as a combination of sines and cosines. So this square wave is going to be made up of a whole bunch of frequencies like we showed over here. And again, the iMRS and Beamer have even many more than this. But you can see, for example, that these are going to be odd integers for a square wave, that on the oscilloscope you can see the rapid rise and fall nature of the square wave, but we don't want to use the oscilloscope to measure frequency. Now, on a spectrum analyzer, this is a spectrum analyzer. A spectrum analyzer will show you the peak in the frequency. So you can see here, this is the largest amplitude, and that's why it's a larger peak. So here we have frequency plotted versus just amplitude, or in this case, it's the amplitude of the occurrence. So it's basically how strong that particular frequency is within the signal, how much it dominates the signal. So in any spectrum, you're going to see some dominant frequency start to stand out. And you can't see that from an oscilloscope. And you really want to make sure that these low frequencies are blanketed, because those are the Earth frequencies and the biologically active frequencies we've evolved with for millions of years. But we don't just want one frequency, we want a broad spectrum. You know, we don't want to just take one vitamin B1, we want to take a good multivitamin to give us the full spectrum of nutrients. So a good PEMF signal is going to be the energetic equivalent of a good multivitamin, an energetic multivitamin. So thanks for watching. Please do subscribe to my channel. I have many more videos coming the rest of this year and next year. And leave some comments. I'd like to know what you think. And for the next Whiteboard Wednesday, let me know what PEMF therapy topics are confusing to you, and I will try to find the most popular one and do that next Wednesday. So thanks again and have a great rest of your day.